Once, when I was studying medicine, I was asked to admit a patient to the emergency room of a psychiatric clinic.
Third week of my psychiatry rotation. Night float. The ER had the usual soundtrack. Monitors, wheels, voices that try to be calm. The psych intake suite sat at the end of a quiet hall the rest of the hospital seemed to forget. 2 doors, one for staff, one for patients, both with hinges that had seen things. The charge nurse handed me a tablet and a reminder, disguised as a joke. Stand between yourself and the door. Don't wear anything you can't lose. I was still learning the choreography. 45-degree angle to the patient, hands visible, chair legs pointed toward exit, nothing dangling. They asked me to do the first interview. The patient had come up from the main ED, medically cleared, placed on an observation hold after he'd been found wandering into traffic, speaking to someone nobody else could see. Late 20s, unknown history, clothing that had a story. A smell people describe when they don't want to say what they think it is. Vital signs on the sheet. Hot, fast, high. I walked in wearing the short white coat that announces student more than doctor. Tablet in one hand, pen clipped away because we're taught not to give anyone an object they can mistake for a weapon. The room was bare by design. Table bolted to the floor, chairs that couldn't be thrown far. Nothing on the walls except the shadow of old tape. The patient stood between me and the door, which meant I had done the first thing wrong. I stepped sideways, slow, until the door was behind my shoulder and not behind him. He watched me make that move like he'd seen it before. He looked at my face and past it. Sweat in his hairline, the whites of his eyes not white, a thread of foam at the mouth. On his sweater, dark stains that could have been coffee but probably weren't. He had the stillness of someone bracing against a wave. I said my name and my job, the stripped-down version with no promise it would help. I told him I wanted to understand what brought him here. He answered the way people answer when they're frightened and certain at the same time. A few words at once, then a lot all at once. I heard that a voice had picked me, that this room was wrong, that there were orders he didn't want to follow. He said there was a reason to hurt me, and it wasn't his idea. Training says you don't argue with a voice. You don't tell it to go away. You acknowledge the experience and steer toward safety. It's not about winning a point. It's about lengthening a minute. My mouth did the protocol while my hand stayed still. I let him know I heard the threat without repeating it out loud. I let him know I wasn't there to punish him. I was there to keep everyone safe, including him. I glanced at the call button on the underside of the table and memorized the distance. I read the room like a checklist. Clear corners, clear floor, no sharps, nothing loose. The air had that metallic heat hospitals get after midnight. The smell hit stronger when he took a step closer. Sweat, something chemical. The faint sweetness I would learn to call by 10 different names. His breathing worked hard like his ribs were running. He rubbed his hands on his jeans, wiped the corner of his mouth, and stared at the ceiling sprinkler as if it were an eye. I tried to lower the temperature the only way I could. Voice like a car with the engine off.
I told him what would happen next if the room stayed calm. Water, a place to sit that wasn't a corner, a nurse who could check the things that aren't feelings, the fever, the pressure, the reason his heart looked like it wanted out. I told him what would happen if the room didn't stay calm. More people, more noise, less choice. I said it plainly, not as a dare. He stared at my hands the way people do when they're wondering whether the person in front of them is about to change shape. He said the orders were loud. I said I didn't want him to get hurt because of something he didn't choose. He said the thing again about me being chosen. I didn't quote it back. I took one step back so he could take one forward and still call it progress. The strange detail I remember is the clock. We didn't have one. The room had institutional time, the kind that stretches or collapses depending on who's breathing. In that elastic minute, he closed his eyes and shook his head as if water were in his ears. The corner of his mouth foamed more. I worried about seizures, about stimulant intoxication, about hyperthermia, about all the things I could list but not fix alone. I pressed the under-table button the way you press a piano key softly. In this hospital, that summons a small team that knows how to be a wall without sounding like one. I told him the team was coming, because surprises make the worst minutes worse. He stood still. The room waited. Security arrived with the nurse who is good at the kind of kindness that feels like policy. They stood at angles, not head-on. The nurse did the calm inventory. Any pain, any allergies, when he last slept, when he last ate, whether the voices were new visitors or old roommates. He kept speaking about orders. He wanted to leave. He wanted me to leave first. He kept glancing at the stain on his sweater like the story was there and not in his head. We offered water in a cup with a lid, because lids are small safety devices you can carry in a pocket. He sipped, grimaced at taste, kept the cup. His hand stopped ringing and started trembling. The nurse looked at me, then at the vitals on the tablet, then at him again. She suggested the medication we suggest when someone's body is on fire from the inside, something to cool the nervous system without borrowing tomorrow's problems. He refused. We let him. You don't win by outrunning someone's fear. You win by making the room livable. The charge nurse asked me quietly whether I wanted to step out. I said no because I was new and thought staying proved something. She let me make the choice and stayed where she could catch me if my choice turned stupid. He paced 2 steps, stopped, looked at the door behind me, looked at the corner with the sprinkler eye, looked at his hands as if they belonged to a different person. There was a smell like old pennies. Then he did something small and huge. He sat. Every psych hallway has a legend about the time everything went loud. I was ready to add mine. Instead, the room chose the less cinematic story. A chair, a cup, a nurse who sets a boundary that sounds like a lullaby, a student who learns how many crises end not with an alarm, but with a tired body running out of adrenaline. He kept talking to the space 2 feet to my left. I sat at a slight angle and told him we weren't locking any doors as long as we stayed safe. I told him we'd keep the lights the way they were. I told him he'd have choices even inside a hold. Choice is oxygen in rooms like that.
By the time the medication offer returned with a gentler name, something to help your muscles rest, he said yes. The nurse placed a small cup in his hand. He swallowed and made a face as if he could taste the policy in it. We set a timer for 15 minutes, which is really a timer for hope. I watched his breathing loosen in slow increments. He rubbed at the sweater stain like he could erase a memory by friction. He stared at his shoes. He told us, in pieces, about the day, noises, faces that changed, the sky moving wrong. He looked at me once as if to check whether I agreed the sky had misbehaved. I told him the sky does that to me sometimes too. Not a lie. Hospitals warp everything. Eventually, the team left the room with the choreography of people who've trained together. One first, one last, everyone visible until the door closed. The nurse stayed with me while he drowsed. She whispered the inventory out loud so I would learn. Temp down, pressure trending safe, muscle tension easing, no rigidity, no clonus, keep fluids, keep the room cool, check labs again if anything tilts. She wrote 3 words on my tablet: method over drama. I sat and watched his chest and learned the first brutal lesson of emergency psychiatry. Danger often looks like a person trying not to drown in a world only they can see. The second lesson followed. You are part of the world they see, whether you want to be or not. Be predictable. When he fell asleep, the stain on his sweater looked more like a map than a warning. I didn't ask what it was. I would later.
For that first hour, it was enough that nobody bled, nobody ran, nobody got a story to tell at a party. People think night shifts are about heroics. Mostly they are about chairs, cups, timers, and the discipline to let quiet be the win. That was the first part. The second started when he woke and remembered nothing of me, but something of the orders that had scared him. The worst moment hadn't happened. The consequences still had to have. He woke an hour later with the confusion sedatives right on faces. Not blank, softer around the edges, as if someone had turned down the contrast. He didn't remember threatening me. He remembered the hallway, the traffic, the storm of voices. He stared at the brown-red smear on his sweater, as if the stain might answer a question the room could not. We treat psych emergencies like fires. Look for heat sources, smother, eliminate the oxygen that shouldn't be there. After the first wave passed, the medicine became detective work. The ED had ruled out the worst immediate things: sugar disaster, infection raging, head bleed, obvious pills. We still had possibilities that don't sit nicely in a chart: stimulant intoxication, withdrawal, sleep deprivation tight enough to make reality crack, an illness that had been waiting for the wrong week to step forward. A mix of all of the above, plus something called life. He wanted to leave. The law said he could not. The hold form used neutral language to avoid scaring the person it protected. Gravely disabled. Danger to self or others. Words that sound like they were written by furniture. We explained them because not explaining is a way of choosing drama later. He asked about a sweater, so I asked, gently, too. He didn't know. He said the stain arrived before the voices got loud. He thought maybe it came from helping a friend whose nose bled, or from falling, or from the order that said to make things right. He couldn't keep his own timeline straight. Psychosis scrambles clocks. We sent the sweater to a bag, not because we were police, but because in hospitals, chain of custody protects everyone, from the patient to the nurse to the person who might one day ask where that sweater went. He tolerated an exam with the weary suspicion of someone who has been examined by strangers before. His muscles were no longer trying to kick down a door. His pupils behaved. He could stand without grabbing for air. The nurse checked for injuries he didn't remember earning. Scrapes, yes. Cuts, no. We logged everything with the care of people who know that scribbles become shields if anything later goes wrong.
When the ED social worker arrived, the room changed temperature. She has the skill I wish came in a pill. She makes bureaucracy sound like kindness. She asked where he lives, who he trusts, where he gets food, what name he wants us to use, which pharmacy knows him. Patient answers to those questions write whole novels in 3 lines. He lived nowhere stable, trusted no one consistently, ate when money and weather allowed. His mother, a city away, was the last number in his phone that answered sometimes. He had stopped taking a medication months ago because side effects were louder than the voices, because a clinic appointment turned into a bus fare he didn't have, because life asks people to manage multiple realities even when a single one is too much. The social worker offered the basics that sit between a bad night and a worse week, a shelter bed we could reserve if the unit was full, a voucher for clothes that did not carry a story, a bus pass that wouldn't get used if paranoia called the bus driver a prophet, a hot meal in a cafeteria that smells like decisions made by committees. She asked whether he wanted any of that. He nodded like agreeing was easier than explaining. We restarted a medication he had tolerated once, this time with the plan to chase side effects before they chased him back to the street. We added something short-term for the agitation and the sleeplessness. We ordered labs that rule out rare monsters because the one time you don't is the time they show. We put in a consult to medicine anyway because humility is safer than confidence after midnight. He asked again about leaving. I told him the hold had time on it. I told him if the night stayed calm and the morning labs behaved and the unit had a bed, We would move upstairs, where the lights are softer and the days make sense. I told him the worst of tonight was over. I didn't tell him the worst of his month might not be. Honesty works in layers. You hand people the one they can carry. At 4 a.m., when hospitals pretend dawn has arrived by switching shift colors, I stepped out of the room and into the hallway, where my heart could put down what it had been holding tight. My hands shook. The nurse put a styrofoam cup of water in them like it was a medal. She taught me the debriefing we do without calling it that. What did I notice? What did my body do? Where did the plan work? Where did luck step in? Where did we almost make a mess that would have made the morning team roll their eyes at us? I said I had stood in the wrong place early. She nodded. I said I had pressed the button and felt like I had failed. She said the button is success. I said I hadn't wanted to leave the room. She said leaving is sometimes the correct intervention. Security walked by and said the kind of thing people who know you were scared like to say. You kept it boring. Boring is the trophy.
The morning brought two problems wrapped together. The first was medical. His creatinine drifted up. His muscles had been working too hard for too long. His temperature had wanted to be dangerous and now hovered on the right side of not. Medicine wanted fluids, monitoring, numbers and lines. The second was police. Somewhere across town a man had been punched, and a camera near a bus stop had recorded a sweater that looked like our patient's. Nothing in our room turned us into detectives. Our job did not change. Treat the body in front of you. Protect the staff in the room with you. Chart as if the future will ask questions. Call risk management. Call social work. Let the people with badges do their job while you do yours. He learned there had been an altercation because officers asked from the doorway whether he would consent to a conversation. The nurse stood between them and the bed until I arrived. Then we traded places. Then we asked the officers to wait until the attending could be there. Hospitals run on choreography because choreography keeps patients from being danced into walls. When he and I were alone again, he asked in a quiet voice whether he had hurt anyone. Not loud, not performative, like a person who had just woken up from a dream and discovered the world had continued without his permission. I told him we didn't know yet, that other people would ask him questions later, that my job right now was to help his brain feel less on fire so that when he did talk, the words would be his and not the orders. He nodded and stared at the map on his sweater. The bed upstairs opened late morning. The move was uneventful in the way you wish all moves would be. He carried the paper bag with his clothing. He walked between a tech and a nurse who kept a pace slower than the hallway demanded. We moved him into a unit where every door opens with a badge and every room looks like a place invented to make the human brain less noisy. Groups, meals, sleep that pretends to be natural. Meds at the med window from the nurse with the kind of voice that makes even acetaminophen sound like a plan. Students don't get to follow every story to the end. Rotations end, patients move, 100 other rooms start whispering your name. I visited him twice more that week on the unit while someone with a better title did the actual work. The voices became less interested in us. His eyes cleared. He apologized to the air, then to nobody in particular, then to me without remembering the worst sentence he said. He asked about the stain and whether it made him a bad person. I told him stains are not verdicts. He asked whether the medication would make him gain weight, or dull his thoughts, or take away his hands. I told him the truth. Maybe. We'd watch. We'd change if we had to. He asked whether he could sleep. I said we would try. The police question turned out to be an answer he could live with. The video showed a flare of shouting, a chase, a fall. Nobody badly hurt. The man leaving the scene while bystanders yelled the things bystanders yell. No charges filed. Our risk team filed their own paperwork in triplicate, because risk teams understand that the quiet nights should be documented as carefully as the loud ones. The sweater went to the laundry with the usual institutional remorse. I left that week with a new category of memory. The moment when a person inches away from violence without anyone calling it a miracle. We love miracles. We ignore inches. In emergency psychiatry, inches are the job.
I also left with a personal rule I keep taped inside my badge wallet. If your body is screaming, listen to it. Then listen to the room. Then listen to the person, in that order. It sounds selfish. It keeps people alive. The third part of the story happened a year later when I returned as a resident, saw the same name on a board, and realized the map on a sweater can become a map for a life if no one redraws it on purpose.
Residency turns a hospital into a city you live in. You learn shortcuts between corners, which elevators sulk, which security guard can make a hallway safe with a look. You also learn that the same names return, not because they failed, but because life keeps handing them the same weather. His name on the board didn't register until I saw him. New jacket, same eyes, fewer edges. He'd been brought in by outreach after speaking to the median on a busy avenue as if it were a person who owed him money. The outreach worker said he'd been off meds a month. The chart said he'd been on and off housing for a year, on and off a clinic for 2, on and off reality since the summer I first met him. The note from the inpatient unit 6 months back read like so many others: stabilized, connected to services, discharged with appointments, missed 2, lost to follow-up. This time the room didn't threaten me. He remembered me vaguely and liked me for reasons that had nothing to do with competence. Familiarity is a treatment. We did the algorithm that my hands know now. Look for the medical wolf in psychiatric clothing. Treat the fever if it's there. Hydrate if the blood says please. Restart the thing that worked or try a cousin of it. Chase side effects early. Involve social work before the medications kick in. Involve family if consent lets you. Involve nobody who will set the room on fire by accident. He carried a small backpack with treasures, half a sandwich in wax paper, socks that didn't match and didn't care, a map of the bus routes folded along the wrong lines, a photo of a cousin's kid. People in hard weather carry records, they're just not on paper. I asked permission to look. He nodded like he was trusting me with the door code. The Stain story had a sequel. He said he'd been jumped 2 nights ago for the jacket and lost it, then found it again at dawn because the person who took it had gotten bored. The cuff had blood, not his. He washed it in a bathroom sink and put it back on because it was the only jacket that fit. Life leaves maps. Laundry erases the legend. We bagged it again, not for police, for dignity. So he could have a clean one when he left, which meant we had to find one in a closet somewhere because budgets write love letters to other departments. He agreed to a small dose of the medicine that slows the world into tolerable. He refused the long-acting shot because the last one had made his legs feel full of bees. He accepted the oral version because swallowing is easier than trusting a needle. We wrote a plan that didn't threaten him with consequences if he missed. We wrote a plan about what we would do if we, not he. The outreach worker had a bed lined up in a shelter that had more rules than hope. It was still better than the night bus. We printed the bus schedule, even though both of us knew voices treat schedules like rumors. Between midnight and 4, when the ER quiets into the tender kind of tired, he told me pieces of a life that could have belonged to 10 different men. Work in kitchens, a sister who tried, a fight that kept getting bigger until everyone involved forgot what it was about, a summer where a medication made the sun hurt, a winter where a different medication made quiet feel like dying. He didn't dramatize. He reported. Reporting is how some people survive themselves.
I asked him whether the voices were commands or commentary. He said the difference didn't matter because the result was the same. It was all a test he kept failing. I told him I didn't want to win against him. I wanted to win with him, against the test. I hate how bumper sticker that sounds. It helps anyway. The best thing we did that night wasn't medical. It was paperwork. The social worker and I called a charity closet and found a jacket in his size that didn't carry a past.
We labeled the old one with his name and the date and put it somewhere safe in case someday someone asked. I have learned that clothing is medicine. Shoes that don't hurt are medicine. Bus passes are medicine. A backpack with a zipper that works is more effective in the short term than a pamphlet about coping skills. We chase those small cures with the seriousness people reserve for big ones. He slept. Not the sedated sleep of the first time, regular sleep. Earned. He drooled a little, his hands relaxed. The room looked like a room again. In the morning, we had the conversation clinics rehearse and life ruins. He promised to go to his appointment. He promised to take pills until a voice told him they were poison again. He promised to avoid the corner where the median talks back. We promised to fill prescriptions and call the shelter and give him a jacket that didn't smell like a stranger. He signed. We signed. Everyone felt like they had completed a ritual that always leaves one piece out. He left that afternoon. I watched him cross the lobby, stop at the automatic doors like they might ask a question, and then step into a day that didn't care that we had done everything right for 10 hours. 3 weeks later, he returned on a different shift after police found him perched on a highway overpass, arguing with a reflection in the safety glass. That night, the team did what we did the first time: calm the body, confront nothing, protect everyone, offer a cup with a lid. Inches again. No miracle. He lived. He stayed. He slept. Residents trade stories the way cooks trade burns. There are the loud nights. There are the quiet saves. We keep a mental ledger of both so we don't lie to ourselves about what the work is. My ledger for him had a new column now. Recurrence without catastrophe. It's not the column anyone frames. It's the column that keeps you from quitting. By spring, I had seen enough corners to draw them from memory. I had also learned the safety math I wish someone had tattooed on my hand. If 5 things are making a room unsafe and you fix 3, you probably prevented a restraint. We fixed 3 for him most nights: temperature, thirst, voices that had too much power. 2 remained: poverty, the kind of loneliness that makes hallucinations feel like company. The 5th changed daily: police, strangers, weather. I don't have a dazzling third-act twist for you. We didn't cure him. He didn't suddenly become adherent and employed and grateful in a way brochures adore. He became a man who, on his better nights, could be coaxed down from a literal ledge with a jacket that fit and a pill that made the test quieter. The last part of this story is not about him. It is about what the work did to me and how I learned to survive it without becoming the kind of clinician who calls people frequent flyers and forgets the maps on their sweaters were drawn by storms.
By the end of residency, I could walk the psych ER with my eyes closed and still find every exit. Nights had taught me to count in inches, not victories. The space between a person and a door. The breath between a thought and an action. The couple of heartbeats where a room decides whether it will stay a room or turn into a story. I had stopped looking for redemption arcs and started collecting tolerable endings. It made me quieter. It also made me better. The corner suite where I first met him, the room with the bolted table and the sprinkler that looks like a watching eye, kept showing up in my week like a recurring dream. When new students rotated through, I brought them there and let the space teach what PowerPoints never do. I didn't lecture. I placed a chair, turned it to a comforting angle, stood with my hands visible and my shoulders uninteresting, and let them feel how a stance can sand down the edges of a bad minute. I pointed out the call button under the table, not as a panic trigger, but as part of the choreography. Pressing it early is not failure, I told them. It's the same as turning on a light before you trip over the coffee table. I could see their shoulders lower when the room turned into a set of choices instead of a cave. One winter night, a student shadowed me through a run of cases that would have made good television if you removed all the parts that actually worked. A man came in pacing and muttering to someone who wasn't there. A woman sat rigid in a chair and watched a corner like it owed her money. A teenager who hadn't slept in 3 days insisted he didn't need rest and could prove it with push-ups. Nothing exploded. That's the part people skip when they ask about psychiatry. We offered cups with lids so hands had something to occupy. We borrowed a blanket that smelled like laundry and not the street. We named choices out loud because choices are oxygen. When the student asked how we knew what to do, I told them it isn't knowing. It's moving the dial a degree at a time until the needle stops shaking. They seemed disappointed there wasn't a single clever sentence that fixed anything. Later, when a room that felt like glass started to feel like wood, their face changed. You cannot teach that shift. You can only let someone stand inside it. My supervisor liked to say the work leaves a tint on your senses. She was right. After rough nights, I would catch myself reading the posture of strangers in a coffee line like a weather map. The first months, I called it paranoia and tried to scrub it off. She reframed it as information. The trick wasn't to stop seeing exits and angles. The trick was to notice them, label them, and then return to the person in front of me. That habit saved me more than once. It also followed me home. In my apartment, I slept with the window cracked because fresh air convinced my nervous system the night had ended. I ran before day shift, even when running felt like punishment, because sweat moves adrenaline out more honestly than any thought exercise. Small routines were my decontamination showers.
He came back a handful of times that final year. Sometimes I was the one to meet him. Sometimes I read his name in a note and could picture the way he'd sit with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor until the medicine unclenched the day. Once he arrived near dawn, not dragged by police or found by outreach, but walking on his own power, backpack hanging loose. He said, without ceremony, without trying to be impressive, that the voices were going vertical again, and he didn't want to do anything stupid outside. Hearing someone pull themselves into the harbor before the weather turns is its own kind of miracle. We gave him the same jacket routine, the same cup with a lid, the same plan with the same side effect warnings, and he slept while the sky lightened into a color the hospital never admits is morning. Another time didn't go our way. He refused everything. The voices made the room sharp, and the algorithm took us where nobody likes to go. Restraints in our unit are a tourniquet. Tight, brief, explained, apologized for, removed at the earliest safe second. We did it the way you are supposed to, with 6 quiet pairs of hands and one voice counting the steps. He glared past me like I'd become part of the machinery he'd always distrusted. The next day, he didn't remember the worst 5 minutes. I did. We sat together while he chewed toast and frowned at the taste, and I realized a difficult truth. Even when you do everything by the book, a night can still hurt to remember. It doesn't mean the method failed. It means the method is what kept something survivable. What surprised me most as I approached my last month was how much of the work was paperwork with a heartbeat. There is a way to write a note that protects the patient, the nurse, the tech who stood between a body and a door, the resident who pressed the button, and the future staff who will someday read the chart with their own hands shaking. It isn't defensive, it's respectful. You describe what the person did and didn't do, you record the words that mattered, and skip the ones that will turn into legend. You write the plan in calm language, so the next shift can inherit a room, not a rumor. The story is already hard enough. Good documentation keeps it from getting harder. One of my last call nights started with a false alarm and turned into a good example of why you build reflexes. Triage sent a page about a man in the waiting room talking to the ceiling. His volume rose with his confusion. The staff signaled for support. We arrived expecting a storm and found drizzle.
A person who had been off sleep for 2 days and had mixed a little caffeine with a lot of worry. The student at my elbow seemed almost disappointed, as if a small fire didn't earn the trip. I let them watch how the same choreography works on drizzle. We sat at a slight angle, we matched breaths, we treated dehydration like the villain it often is. We asked about food, and the answer was yesterday. We offered crackers with the same respect we offer antipsychotics, and we gave permission to nap in a chair that doesn't lock. He slept, and when he woke, the ceiling was just a ceiling again. On the chart, it looked like nothing. On the inside of my skull, it looked like the reason I still believe in this work.
Teaching kept me honest. Students ask the questions credentialed people are too polite to raise. Why not challenge the delusion? Why offer choices to someone who is going to be held anyway? Why talk so much about jackets and shoes when there are diagnoses to name? I answered by telling them about the nights that went well, for reasons that look small on paper. The man who took medication only after someone found socks without holes. The woman who stopped pacing when we dimmed the light over the sink. The teenager who eased a notch when I asked about music, and we let him keep one earbud in during triage, so the world didn't feel like a wall. None of those things cure anything. They do something more useful in an emergency. They make the next 5 minutes possible. I thought a lot about the stain on his first sweater that year. Students asked about it whenever I told the story, because objects carry drama better than protocols. What mattered wasn't what made the stain. What mattered was how he looked at it, and how it reminded me that people arrive in our rooms carrying maps drawn by storms. Our job isn't to lecture the weather. Our job is to check for wind, move the chairs to safer places, and keep the roof on until morning. On my last week, I made a quiet circuit of the places that built me. The charge desk, where the nurses keep the unit running with 3 phone lines, 2 eyebrows, and 1 raised hand. The supply closet, with jackets in anonymous sizes, each one a small insistence that dignity is not a luxury. The security station, where officers tell stories in a tone that means they'd rather never meet you on duty than see you hurt. The cafeteria that serves coffee as if it were a medical intervention. The corner room with the sprinkler eye. I slid my hand under the table and pressed the call button just enough to feel the spring. After years of doing this, I still liked the way that small click felt. It was proof the room had a plan longer than my reach. He walked in that same week, as if the hospital wanted to offer a last chapter. New jacket again, hair shorter, posture easier. He handed his backpack to the tech without being asked, which in our world is as eloquent as a compliment. He said the voices were louder since the weather turned, and he wanted help before he lost the thread. No ceremony, no speech. He knew the drill. We did the labs we always do, not because we distrusted him, but because bodies sometimes tell you a story the mouth doesn't know yet. We restarted the dose that had worked. I wrote the side effect reminders on a card and tucked it in the backpack pouch with the bus schedule and a granola bar. He ate 2 breakfasts because sleep had fallen on him like a blanket, and bodies wake starving when they finally get permission to rest. When he was discharged the next day, he paused at the automatic doors the way people do when something outside feels bigger than their plan. He took 2 slow breaths and stepped through. Watching him walk into the day didn't feel like triumph. It felt like what the job is when you do it right. You make a night safe enough that a morning is possible. I drove home at noon and realized I wasn't replaying the hard seconds. I was replaying the small choreography. The angle of my chair, the nurse's hand on the doorframe, light but ready. The way security positioned themselves like furniture you can trust. The cup lid clicked on with care. The whisper from the charge nurse about fluids before philosophy. The student's steadying exhale when the room settled. I thought of the first night, the foam at the mouth, the heat in the room, the smell I didn't yet have words for, the map smeared across a sweater. And I felt gratitude so large that it made my hands tremble on the steering wheel. Not gratitude for drama. Gratitude that we had built a method sturdy enough to outlast my inexperience.
On my final sign-out, I wrote a note to the incoming resident about a different patient and tucked a separate line at the end that wasn't about any one case. It was about the room. Keep it predictable. Name choices, even when choices are small. Press the button early. Thank the team out loud. Document with the tenderness you wish someone had used on you the last time a room scared you. None of that will make a headline. It will make a shift you can live with. I keep the phrase, "the nurse scribbled on my tablet that first night." It rides in my wallet between a bus pass and a photo of my dog being wonderfully boring. I don't quote it at students anymore because I'd rather let the room say it for me. But it's there when I need it, a rule that fits in a pocket and holds on the loudest nights. Method over drama. That's the whole trick. It doesn't make you a hero, it keeps you from needing one. And if I'm lucky, the next time I'm in a corner room and a tired person tells me the sky is moving wrong, I'll remember where to stand, what to offer, and when to press a small plastic button that summons help before the story decides it wants to be something else.